No one paid attention to the 45-year-old man walking the hospital halls at night in a worn leather jacket, a gray scarf, and a German shepherd at his side. To the staff, he was just the quiet night guard. Then an armed gunman stormed the ward, sealed the exits, and took hostages. Panic spread. Police were trapped outside by a winter storm. But while everyone else froze, the dog didn't move. And the man didn't run. Because the gunman didn't lock down a hospital. He locked himself inside with the last person he should have underestimated. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Snow pressed hard against the glass of St. Gabriel Regional Hospital, the wind scraping ice along the windows, like fingernails turning the small Colorado facility into an island of fluorescent light surrounded by darkness. Jack Miller moved through the third-floor corridor without sound boots worn, but steady the old brown leather jacket creaking faintly when he turned his shoulders. At 45, Jack carried the kind of weight that had nothing to do with muscle alone. His face was angular, weathered by cold, and sun with a short, untrimmed beard beginning to gray along the jawline. His eyes were calm, almost withdrawn, the eyes of a man who had learned long ago that looking too closely invited questions. A red and navy flannel shirt showed beneath his jacket, faded jeans brushed pale at the knees, and a thick gray wool scarf rested loosely at his neck. Walking beside him was Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a broad chest, black and tan coat, and alert amber eyes. Rex moved with controlled precision, tail-low ears forward, matching Jack's pace step for step, a dog shaped not by comfort, but by discipline. On paper, Jack Miller was nothing more than a night maintenance worker, doubling as temporary security, a man who fixed flickering lights, cleared snow from emergency exits, and logged doors that refused to latch. He spoke little, kept his head down, and never lingered where conversations happened. No one had ever asked why he always chose the graveyard shift. No one had asked where Rex came from. At the nurse's station, Amanda Collins sat hunched over a computer, her blonde hair pulled into a high ponytail that sagged as the night dragged on. At 28, Amanda still carried the sharp edges of youth, slim build, pale skin, flushed from the dry hospital air, and a voice that moved too quickly when nerves crept in. She glanced up as Jack passed. "Your dog isn't supposed to be on this floor," she said half-heartedly, tapping her pen against the desk. Jack gave a brief nod, not meeting her eyes. "He's certified," he said quietly, the words clipped, emotionless. Amanda rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath, already forgetting him, as she returned to her screen. Across the station stood Nurse Emily Ross, 32, dark-haired, her curls tied back in a practical knot. Emily had the solid posture of someone who'd learned endurance, rather than optimism, olive-toned skin, steady hands, and observant eyes that missed very little. She watched Jack longer than most people did. There was something about the way he moved about, how the dog never pulled at the leash, never sniffed aimlessly. Emily had grown up with brothers who hunted, who'd served, and she recognized restraint when she saw it. Jack gave her a polite nod. Emily nodded back, unsure why a faint chill settled in her stomach. "Doctor." Thomas Reed emerged from the trauma wing, tall, broad-shouldered, his white coat hanging open like an afterthought. At 50, Reed was handsome in a sharp, clinical way, salt and pepper hair, perfectly trimmed, clean-shaven eyes, always scanning as if the hospital itself existed to be judged. He was brilliant, everyone agreed on that, but brilliance had hardened him. 3 years earlier, a high-profile surgical death had followed him like a ghost, one he refused to acknowledge aloud. He barely noticed Jack as he passed. Men like Jack existed beneath Reed's notice. The night settled into its usual uneasy quiet. Machines hummed, shoes squeaked distantly. Then the sound came, metal sliding against metal, precise and unmistakable. Rex stopped. Not froze, not startled, stopped. His muscles tightened, a low rumble vibrating deep in his chest. Jack's hand tightened on the leash as his shoulders squared, the slouch falling away. The elevator doors at the end of the hall opened. Caleb Foster stepped out, tall and heavy-set, 39 years old, with a thick beard soaked dark by melting snow. His eyes were hollow, bloodshot, fixed on something only he could see. He wore a long black coat, unbuttoned over a tactical vest, gloves tight around the grip of a rifle held with practiced ease. This was not chaos in human form. This was intent. Caleb moved down the corridor and fired once into the ceiling. Tiles shattered, screams erupted, everyone down. Caleb shouted, his voice cracking, not with fear but rage barely contained. Hands where I can see them. Now! Amanda screamed and dropped behind the desk, shaking her hands, trembling violently as she knelt. Emily lowered herself more slowly, eyes never leaving the gun. Dr. Reed stiffened, confusion giving way to recognition when Caleb turned the rifle toward him. "You remember my wife," Caleb said, voice low and shaking now. "You said she'd live." Reed's mouth opened, then closed, the confidence draining from his face. Outside, police sirens wailed, uselessly swallowed by the storm. Snow had sealed the roads. No immediate rescue was coming. Panic spread like a contagion, sharp and breathless. Jack did not move to the floor. He stayed where he was, one hand resting on Rex's collar, his face unreadable. Rex sat at his heel still as stone eyes locked on Caleb, not barking, not lunging. Caleb noticed the dog and sneered. "You," he barked at Jack. "On your knees." Jack slowly removed his gray scarf and let it fall to the floor. When he lifted his head, something had changed. His eyes were colder now, clearer, like ice settling after a storm. Rex felt it too, his ears flicking back briefly toward Jack. Jack's hand pressed gently at the thick fur of Rex's neck, fingers curling just enough to be felt. He leaned close and whispered a single, quiet command meant for one creature, alone. Caleb turned away, shouting at Reed, unaware that the balance of the room had shifted. Whether Jack intended to surrender or unleash something violent remained impossible to tell. The only certainty was that the night had already crossed a line it could never return from. The lights flickered as the storm outside deepened, wind howling against the hospital's walls, turning St. Gabriel Regional Hospital into a dim, echoing maze of shadow and hum. Jack Miller stood slowly, keeping his movements small, controlled the way he had learned years ago when sudden motion meant bullets. Caleb Foster's rifle tracked him lazily, the barrel heavy with confidence rather than urgency. Jack kept his eyes lowered, shoulders slightly rounded, posture deliberately harmless. "The breaker panel's acting up," Jack said evenly, his voice quiet, respectful. "Storm does that. Emergency lights won't hold if the surge hits." Caleb studied him, red-rimmed eyes narrowing. The gunman was a big man, broad-chested beneath his coat, grief etched deep into the lines around his mouth. Rage had burned him hollow, leaving a man who believed nothing mattered except the single wrong he had come to correct. After a long moment, Caleb jerked his chin toward the far corridor. 5 minutes, he said. "You try anything, I shoot the doctor." Jack nodded once. No argument, no hesitation. He turned Rex, rising instantly and falling into step at his left knee. They moved into the dim hallway, where only emergency strips lit the floor. Rex's paws made no sound on the tile. Jack's heart slowed as the darkness wrapped around them. Not fear this time, but familiarity. The hospital at night smelled of antiseptic and ozone, sharp and clean, Yet beneath it Jack imagined dust cordite and burned metal. He shook the memory away. He wasn't there anymore. But Rex was already working head-low ears, turning reading space and sound. Jack reached the electrical room and opened the panel with deliberate slowness, hands steady. He loosened a single connection just enough. Lights dimmed further down the hall. A soft curse echoed from the nurse's station. As they moved, memory slipped through the cracks Jack had tried to seal for years. Heat instead of cold. Sand instead of snow. Jack had been younger then, leaner, wearing a uniform instead of a leather jacket, leading a small team through a village that no longer existed on any map. Rex had been younger too, faster trained to move. When Jack moved, stop. When Jack stopped, bite, only when commanded. The mission had gone wrong in seconds. One wrong assumption. One unseen threat. Jack remembered the sound when the blast hit, the way the world lifted and folded. He remembered shouting names that never answered. After that silence. Paperwork. A flag. Discharge papers that said honorable and meant nothing. Rex had been slated for reassignment, then euthanasia. Jack had signed one form instead of another and never looked back. A voice cut through his thoughts. Jack Emily Ross stood at the junction ahead, half hidden by shadow. Her face was pale, dark eyes wide but focused. She wasn't panicking. She was assessing. "What are you doing?" Jack met her gaze for a half-second, enough to convey urgency without confession. "Get whoever can walk to the west stairwell," he said quietly. "Stay low. Don't run." Emily hesitated, reading him the way she'd been reading him for months. Then she nodded once. "Okay," she said, voice steady, and vanished down the hall. Jack didn't thank her. He couldn't afford gratitude. They continued deeper into the wing. Jack knocking out another bank of lights, the darkness spreading unevenly. Rex paused near a patient room, nose twitching. Inside, a man coughed softly. Jack opened the door just enough to whisper instructions, guiding two adult patients out, one tall and gaunt, the other heavy-set with graying hair and fear-slick skin. Rex positioned himself at their backs, herding without contact, silent pressure guiding movement. Jack felt the familiar click of something aligning inside him. Man and dog. Motion and intent. The first shot came without warning. A crack like a splitting board echoing down the hall. Plaster burst from the wall inches from Jack's head. He dropped instantly, pulling Rex with him. Caleb's voice thundered from behind, fury replacing restraint. "I told you not to try anything." Jack rolled, heart hammering now, not from fear but from time collapsing. He saw it then, the angle, the distance, the way Rex's muscles coiled. "Rex." He breathed barely a sound. Caleb rounded the corner, rifle raised, finger tightening. Rex launched. The German Shepherd crossed the space in a blur of black and tan jaws, clamping onto Caleb's forearm, just below the wrist. The scream that followed was raw animal, the rifle clattering to the floor as blood sprayed across the tile. Jack surged forward, every movement precise, grabbing Caleb's collar and slamming him into the wall. The impact knocked the air from the gunman's lungs. Jack twisted, wrenching the weapon away with practiced violence. Caleb swung wildly with his free hand, connecting with Jack's jaw, pain flashing bright and sharp. Jack tasted blood and welcomed it. It meant he was still in control. They crashed to the floor together. Rex released on command, backing off instantly, teeth-bared eyes locked on Caleb's throat. Jack pinned the man's arm, using his weight, his knee driving into muscle and bone. Caleb sobbed, then not from pain alone, but from something breaking open inside him. "She was supposed to live," he choked. Jack hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. It was enough. Caleb reached with his free hand, finding a sidearm at his waist. The shot went wide, tearing into the ceiling, but the muzzle flash lit the hall like lightning. Jack reacted without thinking, smashing his forehead into Caleb's nose. Cartilage crunched. Blood poured freely now, pooling on the floor, mixing with melting snow tracked in from boots and Rex's paws. The hospital no longer felt sterile. It felt real. Jack kicked the pistol away and rolled clear, dragging Rex with him as footsteps thundered nearby. The first confrontation was over, but not the fight. Caleb lay bleeding, screaming alive. Alarms began to blare somewhere above them, lights pulsing erratically. Jack stood, chest-heaving eyes scanning. Rex pressed against his leg, solid and ready. The floor was slick with blood, and the night had finally shown its teeth. Smoke rolled low along the ceiling as snow-driven wind howled outside the hospital's alarms, blaring into a storm that swallowed sound and certainty alike. Jack Miller felt the heat before he saw the flames. It wasn't the clean burn of an electrical short, but the hungry roar of fire finding oxygen, expanding with intent. At the far end of the corridor, orange light pulsed through a patient room doorway, near the medical oxygen storage shadows, snapping across the walls like living things. The alarms shrieked louder now, a panicked chorus that drove fear straight into the chest. Jack stood for a fraction of a second, jaw-clenched eyes flicking from the smoke-choked hallway to the direction Caleb Foster had fled. He could still hear the gunman somewhere ahead, coughing, cursing, spiraling toward something final and unforgivable. The choice landed heavy and immediate. Chase the terrorist and end it, or turn back and face the fire. Jack felt the old pull, the mission-first instinct carved into him by years of war. Finish the threat, secure the area. Then he heard a scream, thin and ragged, and the instinct broke. Rex pressed against his leg, amber eyes searching Jack's face. Jack didn't speak. He didn't need to. He turned toward the fire hand, dropping to Rex's collar. The decision was made. The smoke thickened as they advanced, stinging Jack's eyes, coating his tongue with bitterness. He kept low one hand along the wall, counting doors by memory, as visibility collapsed. The oxygen storage door stood shut, its metal already too warm to touch comfortably. If the fire reached it unchecked, the explosion would tear through the wing like a hammer. Jack forced himself to breathe, slow, controlled. Panic burned oxygen faster than flames. The first patient was Mr. Harold Bennett, 67, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair plastered to his forehead by sweat. He lay half off the bed, gripping the rail, pain etched into his face. A recent hip replacement had left him immobile, his thick legs useless beneath the sheets. "I can't move," Harold rasped, eyes wide with terror. Skin flushed red beneath the smoke. Jack knelt beside him, voice steady and low. "You don't have to," he said. He tore the sheets free, knotting them quickly, looping fabric beneath Harold's shoulders. Rex moved instinctively to the other side, bracing, lending weight. Jack pulled muscles, screaming boots, slipping on wet tile. Inch by inch, they dragged Harold into the hall, away from the advancing fire. Rex paused every few feet, turning back to Jack, ears flicking, checking him the way he always did, the way he had learned long ago. The second room held Mrs. Linda Moore, 72, small-framed skin, pale as parchment gray hair, cropped short in a practical cut. She sat upright in bed, clutching her chest, breathing shallow and fast. Her heart monitor beeped erratically, the sound swallowed by alarms. "I can't breathe," she whispered, fear making her eyes glassy. Jack disconnected the monitor with quick, practiced movements, slung her arm over his shoulder. She weighed less than he expected, brittle, as if the years had hollowed her. Rex positioned himself behind them, nudging Linda's legs, gently guiding her forward. Jack felt the heat intensify, felt sweat soak through his flannel beneath the jacket. He focused on steps on balance on the rhythm of Rex's movement beside him. They made it into the corridor, laying Linda down beside Harold Jack, stripping his scarf and placing it beneath her head, murmuring reassurance he wasn't sure she heard. The fire surged flames licking along the ceiling, now dropping embers that hissed as they hit pooled water from the sprinklers. Jack's lungs burned. His ribs ached from the earlier struggle. He forced himself upright, scanning for the last room at the end of the wing. Lucas Grant. 18 years old, fresh out of high school, a victim of a car accident that had left him battered but alive. Jack had seen him earlier, tall and lean, dark hair falling into frightened eyes, bravado masking shock. The door to Lucas's room was hot. Jack kicked it open, smoke pouring out in a choking wave. Lucas lay on the bed trying to sit up, coughing violently, panic stripping away any pretense of toughness. "I can't see Lucas," gasped, tears streaking soot across his cheeks. Jack moved fast, hauling him upright, feeling the boys trembling through his own arms. "Listen to me," Jack said firmly. "You're going to walk with me, right now." Lucas nodded, clinging his skin, clammy eyes wide and trusting in a way that cut deep. Rex circled them, a silent guardian teeth, bared at the encroaching fire, as if it were a living enemy. They staggered into the hallway together. The oxygen storage door groaned as metal expanded under heat. Jack shoved the 3 patients toward the stairwell junction, shouting hoarsely for them to keep moving to stay low. Rex refused to go first. He turned back again and again, body angled between Jack and the flames, tail stiff, ready to lunge if Jack faltered. Somewhere deeper in the smoke, Caleb Foster screamed a sound stripped raw of humanity. Jack didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. His world narrowed to the people in front of him, the dog at his side, the seconds bleeding away. The fire had found its breath, and the hospital was becoming a furnace. Jack planted himself between the patients and the advancing flames' shoulders, squared, every instinct screaming that this was the line. Rex pressed against him, solid and unwavering. Together they held as the night roared, the choice already paid for, in heat, blood, and breath. Wind-driven snow battered the hospital's upper floors, the storm outside merging with the fire inside, until St. Gabriel felt like a living thing trying to tear itself apart. The radio on the floor crackled and died as the ceiling above the 3rd-floor wing groaned, beams popping like gunshots. Jack Miller heard the sound before he understood it. Structural failure imminent. Through the smoke at the stairwell entrance, black silhouettes moved with sharp discipline, a SWAT element, pushing in, then halting. The team leader, a square-built man in his early 40s with a frost-dusted helmet and a trimmed beard, lifted a gloved hand and shook his head once. His voice cut through the chaos, amplified and flat. "We're pulling back. Floor's compromised." Jack didn't answer. He already knew. The fire surged again, flames crawling along the ceiling, swallowing the far end of the hall where Jack had been moments earlier. The SWAT team retreated behind a steel fire door, the heavy slab slamming shut with a finality that echoed in Jack's chest. When the door sealed, it sealed him in. The alarms kept screaming. The sprinklers sputtered and failed. Jack stood alone now with Rex and one last patient, Lucas Grant, who knelt on the floor, coughing, his lean frame folded in on itself. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes red and wild. "Look at me," Jack said, crouching hands firm on Lucas's shoulders. The boy's skin was slick with sweat and soot, his bravado burned away by heat and fear. "You stay with me." Lucas nodded, trying to breathe every inhale a battle. Rex pressed close, his thick coat damp and singed at the edges, amber eyes never leaving Jack's face. He was 6 years old, strong, disciplined, and scared in the way only trained animals got aware of danger, but waiting for direction. The hallway behind them collapsed with a roar fire pouring forward like a breaking wave. There was no path back. Jack's mind narrowed, cataloging options with ruthless clarity. Stairs were gone. Elevators dead. He turned his head and saw the window at the end of the corridor, a reinforced pane meant to keep people in to not let them out. Snow streaked past it sideways, the world beyond a blur of white and darkness. Jack grabbed a fire extinguisher, swung with everything he had. The first strike spider-webbed the glass. The second cracked it wider. The third sent shards outward into the storm. Cold air rushed in violent and clean, feeding the fire, even as it burned Jack's lungs. He shrugged off his jacket, looping it quickly around Lucas's torso, knotting the sleeves tight like a harness. "When I say go, you go," Jack said, voice calm, despite the pounding in his ears. Lucas stared at him, eyes shining, and nodded. Jack tied a length of emergency cord around a pipe embedded in the wall, testing it hard. He looped the other end around Rex's chest, fastening it with practiced speed. Rex stood perfectly still, muscles coiled, breath fogging in the freezing air. Jack knelt, pressed his forehead briefly to the dog's, a private moment in a world that had no time left. "Hold," Jack whispered. Rex took the cord in his mouth, jaw locking down with absolute commitment. Jack lifted Lucas to the window, snow whipping his face raw. Below, fire trucks and police lights smeared red and blue across the white ground. People shouted. Arms waved. Someone screamed Jack's name, though he didn't know who. He lowered Lucas until the cord went taut, Rex bracing teeth, clenched legs digging into tile. "Go," Jack said. Lucas slid, boots scraping, then disappeared from sight as rescuers below grabbed him. A cheer rose thin and distant through the storm. The fire roared behind them, heat slamming Jack's back like a hammer. He turned to Rex. "Jump," he said softly. Rex didn't hesitate. The German Shepherd leapt through the shattered window cord, snapping tight as Jack held fast, then easing as Rex landed safely below, barking once sharp, urgent, alive. Jack exhaled a tight sound ripped from his chest. He didn't have time to follow. The ceiling above him gave way, flaming debris crashing down. Jack threw his arm up, felt pain explode through his shoulder, felt himself driven back against the wall. The cord burned through his gloves. Smoke swallowed everything. From below, it looked like the window had gone dark, the fire surging in a final violent breath. Someone shouted that he was gone. Someone else turned away. Inside, Jack hung for a heartbeat longer, muscles screaming, vision tunneling. He thought of nothing heroic. He thought of Rex's weight beside his leg, of quiet halls of a night shift no one remembered. Then the cord snapped free from his hands, and the storm swallowed the rest. Morning broke pale and cold over the Rockies, snow settling into silence, as if the night had finally exhaled. Jack Miller woke to the slow rhythm of machines and the smell of antiseptic, the world reduced to light and sound and pain. His right shoulder was wrapped tight, ribs banded, burns dressed with careful hands. Every breath reminded him he was alive. Rex lay on the floor beside the bed, massive head resting on his paws, black and tan coat dulled by soot that no one had managed to wash away. The German Shepherd lifted his eyes the instant Jack stirred, tail thumping once against the linoleum, then settling again, vigilant as ever. Jack reached down with his good hand and rested it on the dog's neck fingers, finding familiar warmth. It grounded him more than the beeping monitors ever could. Dr. Thomas Reed stood at the foot of the bed, hands clasped too tightly, shoulders hunched in a way Jack had never seen before. Reed looked smaller, without his white coat lines deeper around his eyes, his once immaculate hair slightly unkempt. He cleared his throat, then stopped, swallowed. "Everyone made it out," he said finally, voice low. "Every patient, the nurses, the kid." Jack closed his eyes, relief washing through him in a quiet wave. That had been the objective. Everything else was noise. Reed hesitated, then stepped closer. "Caleb Foster is in custody," he continued. "Alive." The word hung between them. Reed's gaze dropped to the floor. I reviewed the case. "My wife." He stopped himself, correcting his wife. "The surgery 3 years ago. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't careless, but I was arrogant. I stopped listening. I thought skill alone made me infallible." He looked up then, eyes wet, stripped of authority. "People died because I believed that." Jack studied him, seeing not a god in a coat, but a tired man carrying a weight he had never learned how to set down. "You can't save everyone," Jack said quietly, "but you can own the ones you fail." Reed nodded, the truth settling hard. It wasn't forgiveness Jack offered. It was clarity. Outside the room, Amanda Collins' hovered blonde hair now loose and tangled face, pale eyes red-rimmed from tears and shock. She clutched a paper cup with shaking hands, watching Rex with awe and something like apology. Emily Ross stood beside her posture, steady dark curls pulled back, eyes sharp, even after a night without sleep. She met Jack's gaze through the glass and gave a small nod. Respect earned and unspoken. The days that followed blurred together. Reporters gathered outside the hospital gates, voices rising, cameras flashing, calling Jack a hero, a guardian, a miracle. Jack refused them all. He turned his face to the window, watched snow melt into slush, let the world spin without him. He had spent years avoiding attention because attention asked questions, and questions pulled at threads he had tied off for survival. Rex stayed with him through it all, rising only when nurses entered, positioning himself between Jack and the door until Jack's hand lifted in reassurance. Caleb Foster was transferred under guard, his rage-spent grief laid bare for courts and counselors to dissect. Jack did not ask to see him. That chapter was closed. The mission had ended when the last patient crossed the line into safety. Weeks later, Jack returned to St. Gabriel Regional Hospital under a sky scrubbed clean by fresh snow. His body ached in new, manageable ways, scars knitting into reminders rather than wounds. He wore the same old brown leather jacket, the red and navy flannel beneath faded jeans, cold weather boots, gray wool scarf looped at his neck. Rex walked at his side, healed and alert, a living shadow. The building looked the same, but it felt different, quieter in a way that wasn't empty. At the security office, a small gathering waited. Emily Ross stood nearest, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. Amanda Collins hovered behind her, clutching a box. Dr. Reed stepped forward and held out a laminated badge. Jack took it, eyes narrowing slightly as he read. Jack Miller, head of night security. He said nothing, just clipped it to his jacket with practiced care. "Paperwork," he muttered. Emily huffed a quiet laugh. "Someone has to run the show," she said. Reed nodded. "You already were," he added, without irony. That night Jack walked the halls again. The floors gleamed, the lights steady, the doors secure. Rex moved with him, matching pace ears, flicking at distant sounds, tail low and controlled. Nurses nodded as they passed. Orderlies stepped aside. No one looked through Jack anymore. They looked at him, not with fear, not with awe, but with trust. Jack paused at the end of the corridor where the window had once been, now boarded, and reinforced the storm held at bay. He rested his hand on Rex's collar, feeling the steady strength there, the partnership forged in places no one else could see. The war was over. It had been for a long time. But the work, the quiet work of standing watch, never ended. "All right," Jack said softly, voice barely more than breath. "Let's get to it." Rex's tail thumped once. The hospital settled into its rhythm, and the gatekeeper took his post. Sometimes the miracle isn't thunder from the sky or a voice from the clouds. Sometimes the miracle is a quiet man who chooses to stay when everyone else runs. This story reminds us that God often works through ordinary people, through worn hands, steady hearts, and choices made in fear and love. Jack didn't know if he would survive that night. He only knew what was right. And in doing so, he became an answer to someone else's prayer. In our own lives, we may never face fire or storms like this, but every day gives us a choice to look away or to stand guard for someone who needs us. Faith is not about being fearless. It's about trusting God enough to act anyway. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts and subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and quiet miracles. May God bless you, protect you, and walk with you through every night watch.